Yeah, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Career Insights on careers in research. My name is Jihyun Ju. I'm an advisor and program coordinator here at Beyond Barnard. So we'll be hearing from 4 alums today. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today. There will be an audience Q&A toward the end of our program. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or unmute yourself when the time comes. So to our panelists, start off with introductions. If you can sort of speak on your current role and how you found your initial entryway into research, just to get us started, and anyone can jump in.
I can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Gwen Fishel. I am a research and evaluation manager at the New York City Department of Education. I've been here for 6 years. I serve really as like a special projects manager at this point, but special projects having to deal with research evaluation. I do a lot of surveys. I do a lot of interviews and focus groups. I also work on a number of strategic consulting projects, gathering formative feedback, et cetera. And so I got my start. This was my first job after graduate school. I've been here 6 years. And when I was in graduate school, I became interested in research and academic research. And then my last semester of graduate school, I went to graduate school at Peabody College of Vanderbilt University. And I did a consortium program where I ended up spending my final semester of grad school at Columbia Law School, doing a program called the Center for Public Research and Leadership, which involves real-time consultancies with groups of students from policy, law, business, and education schools. And I ended up working on a program evaluation for the Department of Education here in New York. And I really loved it. And I ended up getting hired on by our client. And so I've been here ever since. I will kick it to someone else.
I can go next. Hi, my name is Benita Shah. I'm currently a 3rd-year graduate student at Harvard Med School. My lab is located the lab I work in is located in Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, so I'm based in Boston. The way I got into research was, I think it all started in high school, where we decided there's a science research class, and I took a class there, and I was able to work in a lab of a neighboring college, and that inspired me to continue research at Barnard, and so I worked at a lab at Columbia University Medical Center. I was participating in SRI, which is a great program to get involved with. And then that inspired me to continue research. And so I took a gap year. I worked at Schrodinger, which is in New York City. And then from there, went straight into grad school. So I think SRI is a great way to figure out, do you really like research? Do you want to spend your time doing this? Do you enjoy presenting your work? And then if you do, then it's a good idea to apply to grad school.
I'm happy to go next. My name is Robin Hytowitz. I currently work at the Electric Power Research Institute, which, as the name suggests, we do research on the whole spectrum of the electric industry. So from generation to transmission to consumers. And I'm happy to talk more about that if folks have questions about what it's like to be an electric power researcher. I got my start interest in energy and research at Barnard. So I was able to do my final senior thesis in the energy world as best as I could come up with it. When I was at Barnard, there wasn't really a strong STEM focus as there is now, which I think is fantastic. And so I worked in a lab actually from my sophomore year in speech perception until I graduated, and actually after I graduated. And then I also did some internships in research, one at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, which was fantastic. And then after that, I worked for a little while and started my series of grad schools. So I then got another hand of research during my master's, and then decided I really liked it and went to get a PhD. And so I've been working since I graduated at this research institute for about 5 years now.
Hi, everyone, my name is Terren Wing. I am currently the Director of Policy and Analytics at the New York City Housing Development Corporation. We're a state chartered public benefit corporation, and our mission is to increase the supply of multifamily housing, and we finance the creation and preservation of affordable housing in New York City. My team, the Policy and Analytics team, provides policy advisory, financial, and data analytics, as well as operational planning services to support HDC's capacity. So out of all of you here, I would consider myself the most research adjacent, definitely applying research skills and working with our research team and able to communicate with those folks, but definitely more on the data analytics side. I would say my initial entry into research was probably my very first job after Barnard, which was as a housing advocate at the Urban Justice Center, which is a legal services nonprofit in New York City. A fun aside is that my career services advisor more or less forced me to apply for that role, and I didn't want to. And she was right. It was a very formative role that sort of shaped the rest of my career path and my passion for affordable housing. So if your Barnard career advisor has advice for you, I would take it. But in that role, I did quite a bit of legislative and policy research for both legal and administrative hearings to support our clients' cases. And I would say from that point on, I was able to continue to build on those foundational research skills in each of my subsequent roles.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. So our next question builds on skill set. The skill of research, we all know, transfers to a wide range of jobs and fields, as we're seeing from our panelists here. Can you speak on your decision to pursue research work in the specific industry you're in? And an added layer there, how has your skill of conducting research expanded while doing this particular work? And anyone can just jump right in.
I can start with that. So I've been doing research for quite a number of, way over 10 years now. So considering from Barnard until today. And what that research has looked like has been very different at each stage of my career. So the research I did at Barnard as an undergrad, you have exposure to a lot of things, but have only the beginnings of knowledge of what that could look like. Now, especially having gone through my PhD, I'm shocked that I got paper. I was an author on a paper as an undergrad. So, you know, the span of research is very wide, depending on what you're interested in. And so I think for me, research, a lot of what I do is based around math. And so I would say if someone's interested in getting into the engineering field, take as much math as you can take would be my best piece of advice. A lot of folks I work with also are data analytics adjacent. So doing data science and being interested in that, I found to be a highly transferable skill. The particular type of research I do is a combination of electrical engineering, economics, and operations research, which again are can be very broad topics, but the field I'm in ends up combining them. And so, which I'll say, none of those I took while at Barnard, but those are things that I learned that I was interested in after. So I think you can do research throughout your career at different stages, and it's going to look very different. However, it all contributes to kind of the career path that you don't know that you necessarily want to be on. So that was definitely the case for me.
I can jump in. Yeah, I think for me, because I started my work in affordable housing on the sort of nonprofit advocacy and direct services side, I often felt like we lacked the capacity and rigor to conduct the research and analyses we needed to sort of support our advocacy campaigns. A lot of the times we could tell compelling stories about our individual clients or anecdotes from colleagues about some of their challenges advocating with city agencies, but we often didn't have the capacity as an organization to back that up with research or data. And so My decision to pursue a graduate degree in public policy was partly responsive to that experience. I thought that bringing rigorous data analysis and research to the affordable housing policy space would go a long way in advancing the issues that I care about. I would say, because I'm a hands-on learner, I've learned and grown my skill of research much more on the job than from sitting in the classroom in grad school. I think in my current role in particular, I've learned quite a bit in working closely with our research team, as I mentioned. I think especially in the realm of communicating research findings. One of the initiatives I'm leading now is based on findings from a randomized control trial that our research team conducted over an almost 10-year period. And in working on this, I think I've gained some critical skills in translating some of those technical results to kind of broader audience in a compelling way. A lot of pushing policy forward in what I do is that narrative piece and figuring out how we communicate why certain policy issues are important and how we might change them. So I think that's an important skill that I've gained in my work.
Yeah, I think that Terren and I probably do the most similar type of research, like more applied research, working with stakeholders to convey analysis, what it means, what we call like meaning making. And so I think that in terms of transferable skills from the type of applied research that I do, which is more, as I said, like on the program evaluation side, I think that writing is a really important skill, writing for different audiences. Writing in different formats. So whether that be a PowerPoint or a memo or even just short bullet points for a policymaker, talking points. I think that I would definitely get familiar with Excel or other types of data software. So Stata, SPSS, SAS, Python, any type of coding R is probably a useful skill to kind of just get your head around. And, there's a lot of free courses online that you can take advantage of as well. I'm not sure if Barnard offers courses in that at this point, but maybe in the computer science department. And then I think the final thing that I'll say is, a lot of my Barnard career was spent in the English department. And I always knew that I wanted to go into education policy, more on the policy analysis side, and research was sort of, I didn't really know what research could look like in the education sphere. And I think that, there are a lot of skills that I got through my liberal arts education at Barnard through what was formerly known as the 9 Ways of Knowing. I'm not sure what it's called now. I think it has a different name. But just like being a person who is willing to learn across disciplines and pick up different skills, particularly critical thinking, reasoning, all the sort of humanities skills have been really helpful for me and my career.
The only thing I'll add here is, so I'm a biology student, and I think a lot of the stuff that we have to do in lab, it's more wet lab work. And I think wet lab work, whether wet lab or computational work, I think all of that you learn on the job. So like when you're learning how to run a Western blot or, doing a protein purification, all these things happen when you actually are joining the lab. So you just have to realize that there will be a learning curve. But you can join a lab during undergrad, pick up some of these skills, and then that translates very well into when you actually join a PhD program or grad school. And so I think trying to join different labs and getting a little bit of more experience during undergrad is very useful for that.
Great. And I know that it sounds like many of you started out with your research or your interest, or building on your interest in research during your undergraduate career. But I'm curious, how has your perspective on research changed over the course of your career trajectory?
I can start here. So when I was at Barnard, I thought I was going to do an MD PhD program. And so I definitely thought I was going to go to med school. And I think towards when I was a senior, I realized, okay, like I think I definitely want the PhD. We'll think about the MD when time comes. And so I decided to pursue the PhD. And so I think that I think a lot of people think that academia is the only way to go when it comes to PhD, and you have to realize that there is academia and there's also industry. But after, I think, joining the PhD program, when you get involved in school, you realize, okay, there are a lot of different avenues you can go with the PhD. You can do IP law, you can go to venture capital, you can do consulting if you wanted, you can do a postdoc, and then you can, go and become a PI, you can go to biopharma, and there's a lot of avenues there. And so you have to realize that the options are limitless. And I think a PhD is very attractive. So I wouldn't be concerned if if in the event you don't want to do academia or you don't want to do industry, there's a lot of options there.
I completely agree, but I also caution, at least in my field, and I know that it's very field dependent, that you don't necessarily need a PhD to get a great job. And having gotten a PhD, I definitely advocate for it. But from counseling students who are coming into our program, I always say you need a really good reason. For us, especially in engineering, just wanting to be in school longer is not a very good reason. It takes a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, and also salary wise, right? You're at a huge salary cut, assuming that you're paid. I think most programs at this point have some kind of financial compensation, but it's certainly not the same as having a full-time job. And so having gone through the program, I always tell students when they come to me and ask about, should I get a PhD? I said, why? And having a great reason, go for it. If you're not really sure, get a master's, see how you feel. But again, it's very dependent on your field. So that's, for me, speaking from the engineering field. So I don't know what it's like in other industries. And I think we actually represent a pretty good swath of different career paths of research. But I think also I completely agree that getting experience on the job is something that's sort of inevitable, even in something that seems like a little bit more of an academic setting, which is research. There's still things you don't know until you really get there and have to do them, right? So our research institute, definitely coding. I know someone else had mentioned experience in coding. It's fantastic. As much as you can get beforehand is helpful, but then when you're thrown into it, it's still a whole other can of worms. So I just actually took on an intern, and one of the things that I kind of forgot that I had to show her day one is how to use Outlook, right? Outlook is something that is pretty common across a lot of the companies that I work with, and it's not something you necessarily learn how to use the details of when you're in an academic environment.
I'll just add that I think when I thought of research in college, I thought it was more like academic. There were only like academic researchers. You had to go get a PhD, and then you worked at a university, and you either had a lab or you were doing some sort of more secondary research. And my sort of perception of research has changed over time in the sense of like there's many applications of research, and I echo what others have said about sort of like field dependent discrepancies around about different kind of advice around research. But I think that I really now think of my role in terms of, as I said, applied research, and thinking about really trying to bridge the gap between research and policy. And so it's really important to me in my role to make sure that any sort of research or evaluation that we're doing is going to be actionable, and that it's going to improve outcomes for students, for teachers, for families. And so I think that I've moved from a much more sterile understanding of research to a more dynamic view of research over time.
Yeah, echo a lot of what's already been said, but my perspective has certainly changed quite a bit. I think even in college and throughout my career, earlier in my career, I would have said I did not want to do research or apply research skills in my work. I think I also would have said that I didn't have any research skills. It's maybe a word that I associated more with being in school or academia, which is not something I thought I wanted to continue doing. And I think now, even having been asked to be on this panel, sort of, led me to reflect on how I do apply research skills in my role. And I think I see it now as this super broad umbrella of skills with kind of endless applications. I think almost any job you get will require some version of research skills, even if you're not the quote unquote research person. It's important to be able to communicate with that research person and to have the skills to understand and digest research that others conduct, I think, to inform your own work and your own thinking.
Fantastic. I feel like you guys have, our panelists have given a lot of advice through our other questions as well, but and we are at our final question. So for our students, this is the time to think about questions that you might have for our panelists. Feel free to start dropping those into the chat, or when the time comes, you can unmute yourself as well. But for our panelists, what advice would you give to students who are interested in pursuing a career in research, but are unsure of what kinds of jobs or avenues to pursue?
Oh, nope, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think maybe going back a bit to my answer to the previous question and looking across this panel, I think you can see you'll be able to apply research skills in kind of a variety of roles. I might be the farthest from research as a core function in my day-to-day. So maybe that's coloring my thinking, but I think students, especially for, a first or second job out of undergrad, should focus on work that compels you and that you feel strongly connected to. I think even learning a particular function, organization, or team doesn't really have as much of a research component as you'd like, or what you're looking for is really valuable information you can take with you and then continue to kind of look for that right spot where you're able to apply research skills, and understanding probably from most of us here that it's sort of a non-linear career trajectory that will kind of land you in the role that's the right fit for you.
Yeah, I agree. I think based off of what the panel has already said, like, there is no one right way to do anything, and you don't need a PhD, you don't need a master's. Like, certain things require different things, I guess. And so you can do an internship, and you can do internships during Barnard, and talk to Beyond Barnard, see if they recommend different programs and what they can support, what they can back, and try to do that during your summers at Barnard, and then pursue what you like after Barnard, and then see what do you need to get there, what do you need a degree for that, and then go off of that. There's no one path to do anything, and you can always reach out to alums, and everyone's happy to help.
My one piece of advice would be to find somebody either at Barnard or in the field who can become your mentor, and who can really serve as a sounding board, as somebody who gives advice to you around certain avenues that you might want to pursue. It doesn't even necessarily need to be somebody that's directly related to what you think it is that you want to do now. Just having like somebody who is looking out for you is really helpful, and it's also a really good way to practice relationship building skills, which are important in any sort of job that you will end up having.
It's all been such great advice. It's something I wish I had had when graduating too. I think definitely the mentorship for me was also pretty critical. And again, it doesn't have to be a perfect one-for-one. It could even, be talking to someone that your parents know who is in a career that you might find interesting. Because in the end of the day, it's really about advocating for yourself out there, and that you can have cheerleaders to help you along. But I definitely found that I came out of Barnard, right? That's a Bachelor of Arts. I wanted to do engineering. And so I really had to have someone say, so like tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, you don't need to get another undergraduate degree. You can make it work and we can help you with grad school. So I had a lot of people tell me no before I finally had enough people saying, keep trying, and getting the encouragement. The other thing I'll say is coming out of Barnard, the critical thinking skills that you have prepare you for research. So it doesn't really matter exactly what your major is. If you want to get into research, you're going to be very well prepared just coming out of Barnard. I find now that in comparison to someone who kind of went straight through an engineering, I have a much more well-rounded skill set with writing, with critical thinking than some others do. And it's helped me immensely in my job. So trust in yourself. You guys are doing great. And there's a lot of people at Barnard and in the greater Barnard community who can help advocate for you.
Yeah, I know I said this was our last question, but one more question just comes to mind while hearing you guys speaking on these points of guidance, and that's in regards to networking. What has networking looked like for you guys, either during your undergraduate career or now? If you could speak on that a bit for our students.
I think networking plays a giant role. So for example, at Harvard, we have the Harvard Biotech Club, and here I'm the co-director of networking of the club. And so we organize different events amongst like different VC groups here, IP law, like and even between different colleges. So MIT has a biotech club here, and it's a great way to get to know people, getting in touch with people. And you never know, your interests may change along the way. A PhD is very long. And so as you go through, you may realize, hey, I have an interest in here, I have an interest in this topic. And it's really nice to be able to say, okay, I already know this person. I can reach out, ask them what their journey looked like, and do I see myself doing this? And so I think networking is key, and I think it's really important to start now. So if wherever you are in college, it's a great time to start meeting people and keeping in touch. These contacts are very important.
I completely agree. I don't think that I necessarily like walking up to someone that I don't know and saying hello, but it's something I've had to force myself to do, and it's been a huge asset since then. And so I think just talking to as many people and getting advice, as much advice as you can, is great. I think especially, as someone said to me when I was an undergrad, if you reach out to someone asking just for advice, most people want to talk about themselves, so they'll be happy to talk to you. So that kind of helped me get over the initial fear of, okay, well, I don't want to just talk to someone who I don't know and ask them for advice. I think all of us can have a little bit of that being on this panel. We're happy to talk about how we got to where we are. And so reaching out and just making those connections within Barnard as much as you can, and then whatever job or school you end up afterwards, they're all building blocks. And then keeping those connections as well can be helpful. And LinkedIn is a great tool to help keep old connections.
Go ahead, Gwen.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I think that all of this is really great advice, and also just like not being afraid to just reach out to someone on LinkedIn and like do a cold call or a cold message. Like you literally, it doesn't do anything if they don't answer. Then they just don't answer. But anyone that you're interested in talking to, you should certainly reach out. I feel like networking is really a pay it forward system. So you do it for other people and other people do it for you. And it's sort of, that's the way it works. So you shouldn't feel like you're inconveniencing someone. If they feel inconvenienced, they're not going to respond to you, and you move on.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the word networking can be scary, and it's not something that when I think of that I like to do, but then I realize that I'm doing it. I mean, it's just talking with folks that maybe also went to Barnard or have, some similar experience to you. I think especially being a student is the best excuse to send those cold emails, and most everyone in our community, I would say, will be happy to help you. Again, we received, similar support when we were students, and so we remember that and like to pay it forward. I know that when I was there was a good mentoring program at Barnard that is a great way to meet different alum, not just your mentor, but you get connected with other folks who are involved in the program. And I think, this is how the job market works, is kind of like through folks that it's how you find out about opportunities. So I would encourage you right now as a student to just shoot off those cold emails to people who are doing something you're interested in, or even who aren't. And it's a good way to just practice while you're a student.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your insight. I'm wanting to open up the floor to our students. Please feel free to throw your questions into the chat. You can also unmute yourself and ask a question to our panelists too. You can take a moment for our students to sort of think on questions. We'll give them a minute. In the meantime, is there anything else from our panelists that you'd like to add? Just sort of thinking on what it was like as an undergrad at Barnard. Any other notes of wisdom for our students?
I can talk a little about grad school and my transition from coming out of Barnard, and I did work for a little bit, which I think others have done as well, which I recommend to help you get a sense of what you're interested in. But then after that, I came back to my Barnard thesis advisors and asked them for help picking grad programs. And now looking back on it, I knew so little about what grad school meant compared to undergrad. I think undergrad, when we choose colleges, there's a lot of reasons we choose it. A lot of them are personal, and you can look at rankings, although I think recent passes told us those aren't necessarily super helpful. But for grad school, it's really about the program, and for PhD, it's so much about your advisor. And so I think that's especially when the networking comes into play, and really just trying to talk to as many people who are in those programs. Because again, I was happy when students reached out who were interested in my area to say, okay, these are the programs this is why this program is good, this is why this program is good. And the reputation of the school can be very different than the reputation of your particular grad program. And so that's something I definitely recommend if folks are interested in grad school.
I'm curious mainly because I know that a few of our students or a lot of our students are generally interested in going to grad school. For those of you, who decided that path was right for you, did you decide to go right after undergrad, or did you decide to have a bit of work experience before undergoing that application process? What was that like for you?
So I took a gap year, and I think I highly recommend taking a gap year. Barnard is 4 years, right? And it can be a lot, and it's a nice break to actually explore your interests for a year, 2 years, and like actually see how do you apply your interests, and you can get a sense of, you can get an idea of what you actually want to do after. And then you can decide, okay, do I truly want to go to grad school, or what do I want to do after? And so I think taking those few years right between undergrad and grad is a good break. And it just like also just makes you reevaluate, like, what are your interests? What are your passions? Is this what I want to do?
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think it's probably field specific, but in my case, I actually tried to apply to grad school twice. The first time was after about 2 years of work experience, just my first job at the nonprofit. I did not get in anywhere I applied, and so I applied again. And at that time, I had 5 years of work experience. I'm so glad I did that. I had peers in my grad program who were coming straight out of undergrad. And now coming out of grad school, you just, and being in the program with them, there's just a big difference in sort of, your experiences, your work experience, and kind of where you want to go or don't want to go after grad school. So I would highly recommend having some work experience before going to grad school, at least in the public policy sphere, which is where I am. It helped me land where I am after grad school, and I think it just helps you have a better sense of your interests and where you can go after grad school.
I'm going to take the question in a little bit of a different direction. I think that for those of you who are thinking like, I'm going to go get a PhD right away, or I'm going to go get a master's and then go get a PhD. Like, I think that I was one of those people by the end of graduate school who thought I might go back and get a PhD. And I went and started working and decided that similar to like what Robin said, like I realized I didn't need the PhD to do what it is that I wanted to do. Like the cost benefit of the PhD was not that large for me. And I felt like I was sort of on a good roll. And so that pause like really allowed me to learn about what it is that I wanted to do next had I just gone and like immediately pursued applying to PhD programs. And so I definitely think like taking a pause wherever it is that you are in your journey and like really investigating and doing some introspection around like what it is that you're actually trying to achieve and what are the means that are going to get you there. And maybe there's multiple means, and really, pro-conning those would be really helpful. And I think that like I do that even today, like in thinking about, where do I want to go in my future journey in terms of my career, and like really thinking about, how are you critically building skills in your positions to help you get there, and what skills are necessary. I'm like one of those people, I'm always looking at job descriptions of like jobs that are like the next level for me to see like what skills it is that I need to be building to get there. And so that's even something that you could be doing now, exploring what types of jobs are out there that might be interesting to you, and then like thinking about what the skills are that you need to build to get there.
I think I answered this question a bit, but I saw a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to read it out, but I can start answering that one.
Yeah, Alice Warden is asking a question I think that's relevant to so many. How easy is it to come back to your area of research or academic interest after doing something somewhat unrelated after you graduated? What was that transition like?
So I'm happy to start with that because my undergrad and my first year of working were very different from then my career afterwards. And I don't know if easy is necessarily the word I'd use, but it's very possible. It does take some work, but I think it's very possible. And most of the people I know who came out of Barnard have pivoted, I'd say, a little bit. So I came out, and although I worked for a very small solar installer, and while that kind of sounds like the power industry I'm in now, the work was very, very different. And I couldn't have gotten the job I have now had I just finished school then. So it was pretty easy for me to apply to schools after that, get a little bit of education, and then kind of the world opened up. But that can also just be finding the right position that's a transition. That transitions between the kind of skill set you have into maybe the field you want to be in, but not necessarily the perfect job. There's no reason that you can't kind of take in between positions, like gap positions almost between. And I'll also say one of my close friends coming out of Barnard, she was a music major, worked in finance, and now is a physician's assistant. So there's a lot of options for you if you don't have a straight trajectory. You can definitely do it.
I have an experience that's somewhat relevant. I was in urban studies major at Barnard, so pretty related to what I'm doing now. And most of my work after undergrad was all in the affordable housing space. When I went to grad school in public policy, I was thinking, I've only done affordable housing. Maybe I'm interested in something else. And I just don't know it. I haven't been exposed to it. So my hope in being in public policy school was I would have all these peers in other policy fields and learn of their interests, and somehow we sparked some other interest of mine, maybe. So after grad school, I wanted to leap as far afield of my past experience as I could. And I went to work for a family foundation they were not working on housing. So I was in a monitoring, evaluation, and learning role, sort of measuring impact of the foundation's giving, more on the social services side. They had a portfolio in sort of post-secondary success. And that was very different than what I've been doing. That was my job immediately before my current job. And in applying to housing jobs again, I did kind of think, oh, is it going to look like I took this break from housing, or I'm not dedicated to housing? I think the trick was in kind of positioning the skills in that last role, which were a lot of research and sort of program evaluation skills, positioning them or communicating them in a way that showed they were still relevant to my current job, which they are. So I think the title or the field might sound completely different from your area of research or academic interest. It might sound unrelated, but if you think about the skills, it's like, oh, I am doing research skills in this role. But maybe the title doesn't sound like it. Maybe the field is completely different, but those skills are still applicable.
Terren, I feel like you've touched on something that we speak about a lot here at Beyond Barnard in regards to transferable skill sets. So thank you so much for sharing that. We have room for a couple more questions. I want to encourage our students to ask any questions that you might have, once again, in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute yourselves as well. Last call for questions. I know that the Zoom space can be sort of weird for this, so if you have any follow-up questions to our panelists, you can feel free to email me. My email can be found on Handshake, but also I'll be throwing it in the chat here as well. Thank you again to our panelists for joining us today and providing such thoughtful insight. We have so many students that are interested in the realm of research, and so this panel was just really important. So you will be hearing from me. I'll put everyone in an email for our panelists. A reminder to our students that you will be getting a recording of this event, and we hope to see you at our next Career Insights panel. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining in. Bye.